guys and gals, and welcome. So, Diablo IV Season 2 has been going for a little while, and I wanted to give you my impressions of the game so far. A lot of you may be sitting on the fence, going, hey, this is... They're not, fool me once, shame on you, fool me twice, shame on me, so to speak. And I totally agree with you. I was pensive going into this season as well, and I was also very, not excited. Not as excited as I was back, when Diablo 4 launched, so to speak. But I want to preface this entire video by saying this. Is this even the same game? I really mean it. Is this even the same game? They have changed so many little details, little things that you wouldn't think would change the way that a game plays entirely, but they have. I mean, one of the simplest changes that they made, which ended up being one of the best changes in my opinion, was the resistance system. And I do have a video going over the resistance system and how it works. But if you played Diablo 2, you're well aware of how the resistance system works, because it's literally Diablo 2's resistance system. Straight up, no diggity, it works exactly like the Diablo 2's resistance system. Overcapping, caps, resistances, negative penalties for what, area you're in, and so forth and so on. And you might not think that they're just simply making a resistance system into a more feasible and understandable thing could change how the game plays so ridiculously, but it has. They also added in these really cool things to farm. These mucus-like eggs, the boss parts like the gurgling heads, the malignant hearts, the distilled fears, and so forth and so on. And these essentially act like pieces of... the best way that I can explain it is if you are familiar with the way that Diablo 2 works and farming the Ubers, you have to farm organs. The mucus-slick eggs are essentially the organs that come from the Uber Duriel, Uber Iswal, and Lilith, right? And then the gurgling heads, the malignant hearts, the distilled fears, the other pieces essentially represent the keys that you use to summon the individual zones to go fight Uber Duriel, Uber Iswal, etc. And Uber Duriel, Uber Iswal, and Lilith drop the keys that open up the Uber Tristram portal. And these are highly tradable. They have become very valuable. So if you would like to fight the bosses, this is actually a legitimate thing that you can use as currency to trade for stuff. So if you are playing with your friends and your friend has a bunch of keys to, say, fight Varshan, which is things like the gurgling heads, then you can trade those. For instance, say if you had the ones to, summon, say, this is the Beast in the Ice, I believe, the Distilled Fears. And, maybe he wants to farm the Beast in the Ice, and you want to farm Varshan. Well, you can trade materials with each other. And, of course, the end result is getting the mucus-slick eggs and things that summon Uber Duriel in Diablo 4, not Diablo 2. And he's the one that has the chance to drop the Uber Uniques, and it's just a friggin' really cool system. This patch has changed a lot about the way the monsters dish out damage, about how you dish out damage, and I'm trying not to be, ridiculously dramatic about this, because I don't want you guys to, hop in and see all the same graphics and all the same skills and be like, oh, he's lying, he doesn't know what he's talking about. But when you play the game now, it's really strange, because it doesn't feel like the same game I played in Season 1. It does not. It's like I'm playing a completely different game, and I know that they only changed some of the things underneath the surface, tweaked the way the abilities worked, made sure that the explosions weren't hitting you on a regular basis, stacking up on top of each other a million times. Which, by the way, interestingly enough, when I say the game feels different, it's really just a matter of things like the blood harvests, the way that you have control over your character's, power level. I think the easiest example is I went to go farm Varshan. So Varshan is up here at the Tree of Whispers, and once you have enough materials, you can go kill Varshan. Now, Varshan is very much so a shadow damage character. Tons and tons of shadow damage. And if you go in there with no shadow resistance, well, you're not going to have a good time. The problem with that, of course, is that you end up getting one shot. And, well, what can you do to protect yourself? Well, one of the things you can do is put amethysts in your jewelry. So, as you can see here, I threw 2 amethysts in my rings, and I have 30% shadow resistance on both, and that brings me up to a very nice and toasty 70% shadow resistance. So when I go fight Varshan, I can make myself, you know, resistant to that particular element, much the same way you would in Diablo 2. Like, for instance, when you go into Ubers and you make sure you're overcapped on lightning resistance before you fight Mephisto, because you don't want to get one-shot by his conviction aura and his lightning attacks, right? And, ever since the resistance system has made its way into the game, the changes to the explosions and all the other things going on within the dungeons, it just feels completely different to play now than it did before. You feel much more in control of your character, much more in control of the fact that you died, and you don't feel stupid for dying. Like before, and I'm trying to frame this as best I can. Before, oftentimes when you died, you felt like you had no control over your death. Like, a lot of the times, like, the random circumstance that would occur, you know, monsters or explosions all happening at the same time, or, you know, like, some monster died and then the explosion would go off after the monster died, and then you would end up getting hit by it or knocked back into it. Like, it just felt there was a lot of absolutely random, uncontrollable deaths. Whereas now when you die, it really kind of feels like you actually deserved the death. Like, you're like, oh yeah, I was an idiot. That was my fault. I'm stupid. Or like, yeah, you know, I only have 18.3% fire resistance, and that monster was just straight up melting my face off. So, you know, totally my bad. But if I get my lightning resistance or my fire resistance up, that would probably be a good idea, so I can protect myself versus those elements in the future. And this is the kind of stuff that you're looking at now, is actually protecting yourself from elements, actually using your tactical mind to come up with solutions, right? You're like, oh, I'm fighting a monster that's made out of ice and shoots icicles at me. Perhaps I should get some ice resistance. Also, it's really kind of changed with the items too. And so in the past, I played a lot in Season 0 and Season 1, and most of the time when you looked at an item, if the item didn't have crit, if it didn't have vulnerable, if it didn't have like the 2 main stats, you would immediately throw it away. Also, resistances were also just absolutely something you didn't pay attention to at all. So when you saw a pair of boots that had fire resistance on them, that was considered a negative stat, because in the previous version of the game, resistances were basically garbage, right? So you never really cared that resistances were on the equipment. In fact, it was a negative in general, and you would usually look to remove those resistances from the piece of equipment because you knew they weren't going to do anything for you. But now you actually do want a little bit of resists here and there on your equipment to help defend against, you know, specific attacks. And all of this has changed the way that you even look at equipment. So when you go to the vendor, for instance, if I were to go over here and start destroying items, I would look at the equipment a little bit differently than I did before. Yes, crit and vulnerable can still be useful, but instead of it being a direct equation of if it doesn't have crit vulnerable, it's bad, and if it has resistances or 2 or 3 resistances on it, it's bad. Now it comes down to a more interesting equation of, you know, like, do I need that specific resistance? Like in this particular case with this pair of boots, you notice it has 32.5% fire resistance, and one of the things I'm really low on is fire resistance, so it might not be a terrible idea. Also, things like the resistances on equipment became actually useful now too. So, like Bloodless Scream, which is a unique item, has a frickin' up to 120% resistance on it for cold, which means it completely caps you out for cold resistance when you're using this item, which is kind of insane. And then you don't have to have cold resistance on any other piece of equipment. You can focus on the other resistances when you look for, say, your rings, because the rings have 10% resistance, and then they also have an additional 10% resistance that comes from a single source. So like they have the all, and then they have the say, fire, and this one is poison. So in this particular case, I would definitely try to look for rings that have no cold res on them, because obviously I'm very well capped on cold res. I think I'm actually over by 56%. Yeah, 50.6%, which is a pretty large amount. Now, there are some things that can bring down your resistances and stuff like that, but, I mean, we'll figure that out as it goes along. Now, I had originally been very critical of the blood harvests as well, and quite honestly, I was wrong. Yes, they basically are HellTide 2.0. They are. I mean, I wasn't wrong in that they were HellTide 2.0, but I was wrong in that they were not going to be something that we'd be interested in. Like, the moral of the story is that HellTides are fun. And this is basically a different version of a HellTide that is also very fun. And so going into the blood harvests and doing the blood harvest stuff is actually pretty fun. And you actually have a real reason to go in here and farm the blood harvests, because you can get the items that you need to spawn the actual bosses, right? So also a lot of the times what you'll notice is that inside the blood harvests are also whisper caches. So the blood harvests seem to spawn almost on top of the whisper caches, which is very, very nice. So you go out here, you farm the obviously the events. So there's tons of little events and altars and things. There's also a big one in the center which requires 150 blood, and that one's actually really fun to do. And then you combine that together with all of the, you know, the whisper caches, and then you end up doing a lot of whisper caches alongside of it. And you also get boss or, you know, keys, essentially. I'm going to call them keys. For those of you who play Diablo 2 and you know, they're basically keys. So you get keys from farming the whisper caches as well as keys from farming the blood harvests. And so if you spend a lot of time farming the blood harvest, you'll have a lot of those particular types of keys. Now, where do you find all these keys? There are quite a few different locations. So some of them come from the blood harvests. Some of them come from HellTides. There's a special chest in the HellTide called the Living Steel chest. That's where you get his items to spawn Grigore. There's also the Distilled Fears, which drop directly from the Nightmare Dungeons. There is also the Malignant Hearts, which drop from the world bosses. There's a couple of these that actually drop from various sources, because I've seen the Malignant Hearts drop from the world boss. And there's also ones that drop. So we got HellTides, we got Blood Harvest, we got Whisper Caches, we got world bosses, and I'm trying to think if there's anything else. Yeah, it's all of them, because there's 4 bosses, right? So there's Grigore, and this is really cool too. This is also something that's changed. So if I pull this up here real quick, they basically set it up so you can actually farm the items specifically from those specific bosses. So if you wanted to try and get a specific unique, like say if you were Rogue and you wanted Word of a Khan, or if you're Varshawn, you know, say I don't know, Druid, and you want Mad Wolf's Glee, you can farm those specific bosses to get those specific uniques, and it works pretty well, by the way. And so we have Grigore here, who's pretty good for, you know, obviously has some specific items like Ramalan, his Magnum Opus, Insatiable Fury, Word of a Khan, Wind Force. Varshawn is pretty good for Staff of Endless Rage, Bloodless Scream, Condemnation, Eyes in the Dark, etc. You got Beast in the Ice. He's actually been one of the more difficult ones that we fought so far. All the other ones have been moderately challenging, but doable. Beast in the Ice, we actually failed him on our first attempt. And it also seems a little bit more difficult to farm his materials, because you have to do Nightmare Dungeons to collect his materials. And you need 9 of them. So you need 9 Distilled Fears to actually get access to that. So it does take some time to get to him. Lord Zero was pretty easy. His seemed to come from the world boss. It's called Exquisite Blood. And the Exquisite Blood, it's just, I don't know, I ended up having a bunch of that too. So that one wasn't that bad, because we were constantly farming Exquisite Bloods from the world bosses, and we were constantly farming the world bosses. You just have to kind of be on the spot with that. You could, of course, try and trade with somebody else. And the really cool thing is you only need one person with the materials to spawn the boss, and then everybody gets loot. So taking your friends with you when you do these bosses is actually preferred, because you get more loot that way. And then Duriel himself is the one that requires the Mucus Lake eggs. And we're not quite high enough level yet. We're only like, level I'm level 72, and I think we got a couple other people in the kinship who are a little bit higher than me, like 75, 76. But if you're going to take on Uber Dural, you probably want to be closer to his level, which is level 100, before you actually take him on. And that way you can, you know, not die horribly in a painful ball of fire. However, if it's like the other ones, you're definitely going to want poison resistance when you fight him, because he's very poison resistant. I know I've been rambling for 15 minutes, and maybe I didn't get my point across, maybe I did. The moral of the story is that the game feels really good. Yeah, the game looks the same. I mean, on the surface, the game looks the same. But if you were very unimpressed with the way the game played in Season 1, and you were hesitant to pick up the game and give it a try in Season 2, the only thing I can tell you is it just doesn't even feel like the same game. It really doesn't feel like the same game. Give it a try. See if you like the way that it feels now, because they put in some work. Me and the rest of the kinship were actually joking about this. So, Vicarious Visions is the company that made Diablo 2 Resurrected, and Vicarious Visions did a really good job with Diablo 2 Resurrected. I think a lot of people would agree that Diablo 2 Resurrected is basically a masterpiece. Very well put together, very well done, and apparently, they were bought out by Blizzard, and they were converted into Blizzard Albany. That's what they're called now, Blizzard Albany. You can look it up. And they were assigned to Diablo 4 after Season 1 failed. And all of the really cool changes, all the things that have kind of like changed the entire vibe of the game, I bet you have come from Blizzard Albany, because they're so Diablo 2-esque in style that it's very hard for me to look at them and be like, this didn't come from a, you know, like, to look at them and go like, hey, look, this came from Vicarious Visions. Like, the resistance system is so much a copycat of Diablo 2's resistance system that, and it functions exactly the same way, by the way, that it's just, it doesn't even make a whole lot of sense to me not to point out Vicarious Visions and say that they're responsible for this. And it's a good thing, a very good thing, that the resistance system copies Diablo 2's, because it's so much easier to understand and actually utilize within the game. On top of this, the key system very much so resembles Diablo 2's Uber system, with the keys and the you know, the organs. And we have a system where you can actually utilize the keys and the organs much the same way to farm the bosses, which is absolutely insane. I love it. I absolutely love it. And we've already been sharing parts within the kinship to, you know, summon the various monsters and farm the various stuff, and looking for those uniques. We've been trying to get the uniques. I actually got my Bloodless Scream, which I had been trying to get for quite some time, from Varshan, who is one of the monsters that drops the Bloodless Scream. So, you know, yay, I actually used the target farming mechanics to target farm the item that I specifically needed, right? I've been having a lot of fun, and I know that there is still a lot that they need to do to this game, but I'll be danged if this patch hasn't almost completely changed the way I look at this game. Also, I have to remake all my dang unique item videos. Anyway, as always, I do appreciate you guys and gals watching my videos, even when it's just me ranting for like 20 minutes. Let me know what you think of the new patch. Do you enjoy it? Do you hate it? You know, do you think it's just more of the same? I mean, I'm interested to hear what you guys say. I plan on doing some more Diablo 4 content regardless. And, you know, yeah. But anyway, as always, thanks for watching, and keep watching.